internally in our company, we were calling it the monster film. We then attached a title to it called Night of the Flesh Eaters. And publicity started to come out about the film, and we were contacted by another distribution company that said it was basically a cease and desist letter saying, hey, our client has a movie called Flesh Eaters, and we think your movie will confuse the public, therefore stop using it. We didn't want to get started off on the wrong foot with our movie getting a lawsuit. So George Romero suggested that we change the title, even the working title of the movie, to Night of Anubis. Anubis being one of the ancient Egyptian gods of the dead. And that's the title that we put on the movie. That was the original title of the movie. When we went to sell the movie, the distributors said, all the distributors we talked to said, the movie's great, but the title stinks. We got to come up with a new title. And that's when the title Night of the Living Dead was attached to it. It's also, that title change is when the copyright, the new distributor did not put a copyright on the new title, and they were handling that. We did not handle that.
What I actually was referring to was an actual split of the title between Russo and Romero.
Jack.
Well,
Jack
that's
The first part and the second part.
the way it ended up, since the shareholders voted unanimously to only make one movie, so it meant that we had George Romero and I, being the writers, had given them Image 10 the right to make just one movie from the script. So therefore we ended up owning the literary rights. And George was working on something called Dawn of the Dead, but a totally different script from what ended up being made. And Russ and Rudy Ritchie and I were working on a script called Return of the Living Dead. So I gave George the right to do Dawn of the Dead and call it a sequel, and then he gave me the right to do Return of the Living Dead, but not to call it a sequel, which was okay with me, obviously. We signed that agreement, so we both went forward with separate spin-offs from the original movie.
Very cool. Very cool. I've never quite heard the full story.
Well, the full story would take about 100 pages. I mean, all of these things are very complicated, and the hardest part is raising money for any film and getting everybody on the same page, mainly the backers and the distributors. And almost every movie is a very complicated affair to actually get it to the screen. I think Richard Ebert said one time, it's a miracle when any movie gets made. And that's true. And I said, well, then how in the hell can you rate them with a simple thumbs up and thumbs down?
We got any more questions out there, guys? His, and then we'll do you, okay?
Did any of you save any props or clothing from when you filmed the movie? And if not, or maybe you have in the past, what did you have at some point?
Did you guys
I
hear the
tell
question?
you, I was so damn glad to get out of the Army. I threw my uniform away when I was done with it, and I shouldn't have. But, so if I had that, it'd be worth a lot of money. Somebody has the music box. I think it might be Kyra. Russ might know who has it. Mostly we didn't keep. I left, the old crank-up Victrola in the house, for example, was mine. As a kid, my uncle and aunt bought it for. I just left it there. We left a whole lot of that stuff there, knowing the house was going to be bulldozed, and we just wanted out of there.
If we had known then what we know now, that would be a very, very different matter. No, there's very little in the way of wardrobe, of props, very, very little of that. And we're sorry, but it just doesn't exist.
I was the only one that kept the script for some reason, so those scripts, I'm sorry, those scripts that I sell, my script auction for $5,000, and I said to George, well, why don't we make 1,000 signed and numbered? So that's why I have those. I don't know why nobody kept the script, but I guess everybody was glad to get rid of it. It was quite a grueling thing to make that movie back then with almost no money.
We also had absolutely no comprehension of what this modest little film that we self-financed and did out of the love of making films. And we thought, well, Bill Cardill at the time had his Saturday Night Chiller Theater program, and they were running so-called scary films. Well, some of them weren't so scary, and we said, well, if we're going to make a movie, it might as well be a horror film, because some television station is buying those films that we're seeing on Chiller Theater, and surely we can do something that's at least that good. But we had no comprehension that 50 years later, people were going to be interested in the modest little film that came from Evans City and Pittsburgh. But somehow, the content of that film has caught the public imagination well enough that 50 years later, we're still here talking about it, and you guys are here interested in finding out more information about it. We're extremely grateful, but we had no comprehension that such a thing would happen. We thought maybe a couple of years, so that we would make our money back from drive-ins and neighborhood theaters, but it certainly exceeded our expectations.
We didn't know the distribution business either, because we had no experience with that. And Russ and George, we voted that Russ and George should be the two people that take the finished film to New York to try to sell it. And I think if you've never heard that story, Russ should probably tell it now, because that was an unusual circumstance.
Well, it was. I don't know how many of you were around in 1967, but there was a great deal of tension in this country, political tension because of the war that was going on in Vietnam, and a great deal of racial tension. Dwayne Jones, who plays the character of Ben, he got his job as Ben simply because he was the best actor to audition for the part. So now we've got a story that has a white woman holed up in a farmhouse with a black man. Well, we knew that there would be certain parts of the country that would not appreciate that juxtaposition. However, we did what we thought was the right thing at the time. We hired Dwayne Jones as the actor, Judith O'Dea as Barbara, and went ahead about our business making the film. After the film was finished in 1968, the spring of 1968, George and I were driving to New York City on the Pennsylvania Turnpike on a Sunday evening. We had appointments Monday morning to show distributors our brand new film, which it was called Night of Anubis. We're driving along the turnpike, and a news bulletin comes on that Martin Luther King had been assassinated that day. That was a tragedy, but for us it was, well, I wonder what this newest layer of civil unrest is going to do to our film that has a white woman and a black man in the two leads in the film. Fortunately, that all worked out. People were able to look past that racial diversity, and the film went on to be quite successful. The assassination of Dr. King was certainly a tragedy, and that still remains with us and is still an influence today on most of our lives, whether we realize it or not.
But the thing is, you were heading there with a film where the black hero gets killed by a white policeman, and you're wondering, right, you know, here, the cities were in flames already, and that was one of your major concerns, correct?
We had time. I think let's do one more question. We had this guy right here in the front.
So besides the premiere in October '68, maybe if you remember what theater you actually saw it the first time by yourself?
It was the Fulton. The
Fulton.
Theater.
No, not besides the premiere. When you went out on your own, and you remember what theater?
I don't remember the theater. We all split up and went to different theaters, but I don't remember which one I went to. But for the first time in history, the Stern, the Associated Theater chain, already had ads in the papers the next day apologizing for turning people away because the drive-ins were sold out, and there were a lot of drive-ins on Route 51 South on the way into Pittsburgh, and I saw the lines, and they were lined up out of the drive-ins and out onto Route 51, blocking traffic. That's how many people came, and so the film was a hit from the start, and it did the same kind of business. You know, the distributor only pulled about 17 prints to start with. That's how independent distributors work. And then if a film was a hit, they'd pull more prints and try to get more bookings and move it city to city. They didn't, that kind of distribution, it wasn't like a major distributor where 2,000 or 3,000 theaters will open on the same day with a picture. So they kept pulling more prints and moving it from Pittsburgh to Cleveland to Philadelphia to LA to wherever, and the grosses, the money that it was bringing in was going through the roof no matter where the picture went, except we weren't getting paid.
Well, you know, I was 15 when the film was shot, and the next year I was 16, and I got my first job, and it happened to be at a movie theater on the South Side. And I was really excited to see that the film was going to arrive there. I saw myself in the trailer. I was tickled pink, and very, very proud of it whenever I saw it there, and invited everyone to come and see it. And I pointed myself out. And believe me, to see me in the film, it needs to be pointed out. It's very, very brief. But it was a great thing. They changed the marquee at the Arcade Theater every 3 days, but they had to hold it over because the business was good. There was a little card they used to put in the box office, and the manager of the theater put my name on it. I still have it. I'm very pleased.
Oh, that's
by it.
great.
But the very best story about seeing the film for the first time is Dick's story. He needs to tell it to you.
I knew that was coming. Well, actually, the first time I seen it was the premiere, but that was while I was home on leave from the service. But then the second time I seen it, I was in Ubon, Thailand, in Southeast Asia, during the Vietnam War. And I suppose I'm supposed to tell the whole story. Well, the guys I worked with, I said, I seen it was going to be playing, and I told the guys that I worked with, because I joke around a lot, all the time. And I told the guys that I was in that movie. And they said, yeah, right. You know, this guy pulls our chain all the time. You know, there's no way he's in this movie. So one of the guys, now you're talking 68. I make like $3 an hour, okay? And so anyway, we were talking about this movie, and I'm telling them about it. And well, I said, I'm in it. And they said, no, there's no way. So one guy says, I'll bet you $10. There's no way. Now that's like a $50 bet now, you know. Bet there's no way you're in that movie. So one of the other guys says, I'll go with him, and then tomorrow morning he can give you his $10. Okay. So we go to the movie, and I'm telling them, God, this is this, and this is, you know, where everything's at. There I am, sure enough, you know. So next morning we go into work, and the guy's standing there in the morning. He goes, well, and the guy I was with looked at him. He says, you owe him $10.
That reminds me of another story like that. My friend Ray Duquesne, well, Russ knows him too. We've been friends for a long time, and he got in a famous brawl with George Costanza, by the way, who played the sheriff. They got in a fight at the VFW in Clareton. and it was like in a Western movie. They crashed through this huge picture window. They crashed back through the picture window. They broke every bottle of whiskey in the place, blah, blah, blah. But that's a sidelight. So later, after Night of the Living Dead comes out, Ray Duquesne was in Florida, and he took a girl on his first date with her to the drive-in to see Night of the Living Dead. And Ray would go, there's Jack, that's me, they call me Jack. Or there's Russ, you know, George Costanza. So when the movie came to an end, the girl left the drive-in and she said, you're the craziest son of a bitch I ever went out with. There's no way you know all these Hollywood people you're bragging about.
To get back to your original question, the night, October 2nd, the second night that Night of the Living Dead was open after the premiere, I went by myself to a small theater in Homestead in Pittsburgh, very, very close, one street away from where the Waterfront, if you're familiar with the big shopping center called the Waterfront in Homestead is. It was a small theater there, but that neighborhood was primarily a black neighborhood. So everyone that was in the theater except me was black. I had never seen an audience reaction. They were, of course, completely with Ben, the hero of the film. They loved it. And when Carl Hardman would come on the screen and talk about going down to the basement, this audience would actually stand on the seats and shout vindictive epithets at the screen. When when the Ben character got shot and the circumstances under which he got shot, the audience was absolutely silent. And I have never